Flashback to 1996. The global gaming industry was in a state of ecstatic revolution. Sony successfully established itself as a main competitor in the console market. The Sega Saturn struggles and Nintendo releases their newest console, the Nintendo 64, alongside Super Mario 64. 1996 also marked a significant shift in PC gaming, with the releases of Tomb Raider, Quake and Diablo. When one looks back at 1996, it's impossible not to notice the tendency towards 3D-emphasized gameplay and technologies, which would only become more relevant for several years to come. Welcome, dear ladies and gentlemen, to an overlooked part of gaming history. This is the history of Gothic and the forgotten birthplace of 3D action RPGs. Germany, Bochum, October 12, 1997. The majority of Germany's video game production was focused on developing cheap and quick games, usually in form of economy simulators or, in the near future, browser games. However, 4 young game developers under the label of Greenwood Entertainment were sick of working on what many people saw at the time, shovelware. This led the 4 developers, Mike Hoge, Alex Brüggemann, Stefan Newell and Tom Putzky, to work behind closed doors on a new innovative RPG video game. One particular day, a group of 3 students present a unique demo to Greenwood Entertainment, which left the executives impressed. Greenwood Entertainment not only employed the group that would later be known as the Mad Scientists, they also licensed their presented Z-Engine or Zengen for exclusive use and began to collect concept ideas from the developers in the company. Unfortunately, Greenwood Entertainment ran out of funds shortly after. The 4 developers decided to take the future of this unique RPG into their own hands and founded the company Piranha Bytes Software GmbH on October 12, 1997 in Bochum. Times were hard, however. The new-founded company lacked money above all else and had to compensate for it by using their savings and working overtime on a daily basis. Even though they had an exclusive license to the Z-Engine that the Mad Scientists made, they still struggled with the scope of what they intended to do: a full 3D medieval action RPG with real-time combat and a world filled with details. When they eventually had no other choice, they had to employ newcomers via personal contacts. Despite that, they insisted on sticking to their original idea and to create a world that would feel as alive as possible. In that regard, the newcomers turned out to be of invaluable help in realizing this vision. For example, in order to limit the scope of the original game's overworld, they implemented a visible barrier that would naturally show the player the limits of how far he could go. Another example of an innovative feature would be motion capturing for all character animations in the game, including the NPCs. In 1998, Piranha Bytes would hire a new programmer for the game with the name of Kai Rosenkrantz. Known by the community as Cairo, he took on the jobs of being the main composer, sound designer, visual effects artist, tool developer, as well as to become the community manager of Piranha Bytes. During this time, Piranha Bytes was part of a unity of companies. This unity would soon appear on the stock market as Phenomedia AG in 1999, and the Piranha Bytes Software GmbH became a full subsidiary, which secured the funding for what is by then known as Gothic. Soon after, in 1999, Gothic made its first public appearance. Despite the lack of any extensive PR work, the game caught the interest of the media and RPG fans, who were curious about the game's potential and whether or not it could live up to its promises. This relationship only improved as Piranha Bytes continued to communicate their development progress to the public. However, despite positive first impressions, Piranha Bytes struggled to find a publisher for the game. While most publishers liked the demo that Piranha Bytes presented, they were heavily concerned about publishing a new IP from an unknown developer studio in a still growing market. The developer studio turned out to be lucky in the end, as they found a willing publisher in Shoebox. Shoebox was a label created by the cooperation between DTP Entertainment and the interactive division of the Egmont Ehaber Publishing Company, a subsidiary of the Egmont Ehaber Media Group. A few months before the game's release, concerns about the cancellation of features like the multiplayer started to rise, which Piranha Bytes justified with the enormous amount of work that this kind of content would require. Gothic launched March 15th of 2001 in Germany, Austria and Switzerland, and the media had mixed receptions, from outstanding to mediocre ratings. Gothic featured stunning graphics that pushed even the most powerful hardware to its limits, an innovative guild system that encourages replay value, the first functional real-time combat system in an action RPG, and the beautiful world design delivered a possibility of exploration that has never been seen before. Every line of dialogue was voiced by professional voice actors, and the story, as well as the setting of Corinnes, offered a totally new experience to RPG fans. Gothic even had a completely new rendition of Herr Mannelik, of the medieval folks band In Extremo. This feature was later removed with a patch due to licensing issues, to the dismay of many players. The difficulty remains a point of controversy throughout the years, with many claiming that Gothic was unnecessarily punishing towards the player. The game also launched with a ton of problems, most of which were patched by Piranha Bytes soon after. Despite these issues, Gothic turned out to be a commercial success and sold over 50,000 copies in its first month. The developers also gave the community a program which allowed them to modify Gothic, a scene which is still active even in 2019. After a delay of half a year, the international versions would finally release, with THQ handling the international Europe release on October 30th, 2001, and Xiscat Interactive being responsible for the game's United States release on November 23rd, 2001. In order to support the new game, a 44-page prequel comic book was released that describes the past of 4 NPCs. Today, this comic is considered a collector's item, as it only had one reprint in a new issue of the magazine PC Games on November 29, 2006, but only the first print of that magazine featured the comic. Gothic's initial success left Piranha Bytes hopeful for the future, but just like the Anno series at the time with Anno 1602, the game's delayed release failed to grab attention in the United States and other countries, which was also due to problems in localizing the game.
Now I'll only serve the sleeper. No more Templars or gurus. Only me alone. Die!
This led to Gothic technically being a success, but not successful enough to even out the development costs. Most people blamed the piracy market, the lack of advertisement, and the technical condition that Gothic was first released in. Piranha Bytes announced an add-on for Gothic 1, in which the player, following the end of Gothic 1, would take control of King Roba II to personally investigate the reason behind the barrier's disappearance. Plans were cut short when the Egmont Ehaber Media Group closed its interactive division in late September of 2001, thus cancelling the collaboration with DTP Entertainment and leaving Piranha Bytes without a publisher once again. This led the studio to develop a full sequel for Gothic instead. For this, Piranha Bytes began to modify the Z engine with the intention of making a game that would improve upon everything that the first game introduced. The development of Gothic 2 and the Z Engine 2.0 went smoothly until August of 2002. From 2000 to 2002, the parent group of Piranha Bytes, Phenomedia AG, began to fake their numbers, leading to a huge financial scandal in April of 2002. To give you an example, their value fell from a high of €90 to 85 cents per stock. The Phenomedia AG had their management buyout in August of 2002. Using their savings, Piranha Bytes bought the license to Gothic and became an independent developer again. As this was the case, Piranha Bytes founded Pluto 13 GmbH, their own parent company in which all private shareholders were employees of Piranha Bytes. Founding Pluto 13 also forced the developers to move from Bochum to Essen for better accommodations. Even though Pluto 13 had their independence back, the question of publishing and financing still remained. Jowood Entertainment AG would pick up on this question and back Pluto 13 as a publisher and funder. It was a gamble for everyone involved, but on November 29, 2002, their patience was rewarded. Gothic 2 released, and even though its technical stability was questionable once more, it wasn't as bad as in its predecessor. To the contrary. Despite the slightly aged graphics by the time it released, it still pushed the current hardware to its knees with its unrivaled distance renderer and even more detail in its world design. While some players accuse Piranha Bytes of cutting corners by reusing parts of the predecessor's map, the majority of players agreed that the content was changed enough to be justified. For example, the modifications on the Z Engine 2.0 allowed Gothic 2 to have 4 times the detail of Gothic 1, which added no additional loading times despite a mostly seamless world. 3 common points of criticism divert back to the game's clunky combat system, too many glitches that would occur, and most players found Gothic 2 to be too easy. Gothic 2 changed many mechanics of the previous game. It would be hard to say if Gothic 2 has something that is inherently worse than the first Gothic title. Sales as well as receptions reflected that. Selling over 100,000 copies in its first month, Gothic 2 was an immediate commercial success, holding the top sales spot for the first 2 weeks and staying set at number 2 by the end of December, only being directly behind the popular Anno franchise. Not only did it manage to save Jowood from bankruptcy, even out the development costs of both Gothic 1 and 2, but it also established Gothic as a cornerstone franchise in a growing market. Jowood released the international European version of Gothic 2 on June 13th of 2003, while the United States version was nowhere to be seen. In the meantime, Piranha Bytes was focusing their development on an add-on that would add content to every single aspect of Gothic 2, from another campaign that was fluently integrated into the main story, to an entirely new overworld to explore, hundreds of new items and returning characters, as well as enhancing the lore and dialogues in the game with more than 8 hours of additional recorded dialogue. The biggest changes of the add-on were not in form of introducing more weapons, monsters, or building out pre-existing locations, but the rebalancing of the entire game, which turns the easy Gothic 2 into an extremely challenging game, with the player often dying in one hit in the first 15 hours of the game. Overall, this add-on, on average, added about 5 to 20 hours of additional gameplay per playthrough to Gothic 2. This add-on would release under the name The Night of the Raven in Germany on August 22nd, 2003. Receptions and sales turned out to be positive for this add-on as well. Many players still criticized a technically unstable release, leading to many unfinishable quests and unexpected crashes. While those were mostly issues that Piranha Bytes fixed shortly after, the most common criticism changed. Instead of Gothic 2 being too easy, Night of the Raven made the game too hard to finish for some people. Only a few months after the add-on's release, the US version of Gothic 2, which came bundled with Night of the Raven in the Gothic 2 Gold Edition, finally launched on October 23rd of 2003, published by Atari. Unfortunately, this localization was another flawed release with questionable voice acting.
Are you the one who runs this place?
I am Bromo, this is my house and these are my girls. I like my girls. And if you like my girls too, then you'll pay for it, 50 gold pieces.
There were also severe issues between Atari and Piranha Bytes, as Atari hasn't told the German developers about the US release date or when they would even plan to release the game, which led to another international Gothic game without a marketing effort. Gothic 2 continued to sell well in Europe, selling 300,000 copies by early 2004 and over 500,000 copies by early 2005. Seeing a chance for Gothic to capitalize on the US market, Joe Wood made a deal with Asper Media to re-release Gothic 2 alongside a few other games in the US, which happened on November 29, 2005. Obviously, the next game in the franchise was going to be Gothic 3, and Piranha Bytes immediately began to work on it with big ambitions. Gothic 3 was supposed to feature the largest handcrafted open world for its time, but that desire immediately caused problems. There were no available game engines in 2004 that could possibly display an actual seamless world without loading times. This forced Piranha Bytes to begin work on a new project, the Genome Engine. It was supposed to be like a miracle among engines. Blood and reflections without the use of HDR, material shader support, and more. All of this was supposed to be possible with one of the earliest implementations of dual-core rendering. The first impressions during the Gamescom 2005 were cautiously mixed. Gothic 3 itself made a positive impression, but the frame rate of the Genome Engine didn't. Meanwhile, let us move on to a scandal in video game history. Joe would acquire the publishing rights to a certain game. A game based on one of the most popular sci-fi TV shows at its time, Stargate SG-1. In cooperation with the developer Perception, who developed Stargate SG-1, The Alliance, Joe Wood was supposed to release the game in Europe, with Namco getting the job of handling the US release. For those that are familiar with that name, we are not going into detail about this one. This one game could fill out a 20-minute video on its own easily. I'll just quickly summarize what is most important for us. Joe Wood was the main publisher for this licensed game, and despite an alpha version that was roughly 90% finished, Joe Wood suddenly filed a lawsuit against the developer Perception and announced on August 5, 2005 that they would cancel the contract with Perception. The publisher justified the cancellation with the insufficient quality and constant delays of The Alliance. Joe Wood demanded a repayment fee from the developer studio, but after a relatively short legal struggle, Perception prevailed and kept the rights to The Alliance. This left Joe Wood with severe financial damages, and it forced them to go to Koch Media for debt recovery on November 17, 2005. Luckily, Koch Media, better known as their subsidiary, Deep Silver, demanded nothing in return, and Joe Wood was able to restructure their company's business model. With that in mind, dear viewer, now it is time to introduce you to Gothic's big international moment in the spotlight. Welcome to E3 2006, the battlefield of RPGs. Despite immense competition, one of the biggest hot topics of E3 2006 was about two games in particular: The Elder Scrolls IV versus Gothic 3. Gothic 3 managed to impress on E3 2006, presenting a demo to attendees which left them impressed, especially in regards to the NPC AI and environment graphics that were enhanced with the speed tree engine as well as NVIDIA physics. Most people left wondering if this or maybe Two Worlds will be the new RPG to become the main competitor to The Elder Scrolls. Gothic 3 received a release date for fall of 2006, which raised concerns of the Gothic community. The fans accused Joe Wood of skipping the quality assurance phase of other games to release them quicker, and to then patch the bugs and glitches afterwards. E3 2006 is over. Many RPG fans kept an eye out for Gothic 3, and its progress was watched very closely by the active community, something that Joe Wood was aware of. Joe Wood increasingly started to involve themselves in the community and assured them that the release would be as good as possible to the best of their abilities. Introducing one of Joe Wood's most infamous employees, Ivan Erdlov, aka Crazy Ivan, and his profession was to be Joe Wood's community manager for Gothic 3.
The lagging is not noticeable unless you are looking for IT. All books start cold the minutes the games fan are definitely layout. It's difficult to trivialize the problems. If there aren't any beginners, no books is a question of definition.
Even claimed that the release would be absolutely perfect, and that the remaining glitches were funny to the player. On September 13th, Joe Wood announced the completion of Gothic 3's development. Only a few days later, the readers of PC Powerplay received the newest issue of news, reviews and columns, including a review of Gothic 3. Within 12 hours of the magazine's release, at 2:55 p.m., Joe Wood's marketing director called the outlet and accused them of destroying the game. In addition to that, he threatened them by saying that he would make sure that this issue would never hit store shelves, and that he will convince all of PC Powerplay's business partners to pull their ads from their outlet. After hanging up, it didn't take another 3 hours until another associate of Joe Wood called their outlet, but this time it was the lawyer. He tells the outlet that the marketing director and the CEO are both very angry, and that's not good. The lawyer offered them to pull their own issue out of their own volition, but PC Powerplay rejected his friendly proposal. Within another 3 hours, on 7:29 p.m., they received an email from the same lawyer, putting on a very different tone that says,
"Since we dislike this style and you obviously report on Joe Wood's expenses as part of your headline suggests to your reader not to buy the product, we intend to file a claim for damages against you in case another delivery takes place."
PC Powerplay delivered their magazines on the next day anyway. The following day, a total shitstorm reigned upon the Joe Wood and Gothic forums when its users copied parts of the review and posted them online. Of course, Crazy Even had a damage control plan, creating a very infamous meme among the Gothic veterans because on that day, September 21st, on 8:12 p.m., he posted this. Any member of the community who can find a reproducible A-bug in the release version that can be traced back to Gothic 3 and not your hardware will be invited from me to an exhibition fight camp for a weekend. You'll be entertained, trained, and, if interested and of age, sent to Nirvana with meat. Piranha Bytes confirmed Joe Wood's statements about a bug-free release version, and that PC Powerplay had, in fact, an older version. Despite that, they publicly cancelled the gold status of the game. Friday, October 13th, 2006. Gothic 3 officially launches and the reviews are public. If you were one of the lucky ones, you were able to play the game for 30 minutes before crashing. If you were an unlucky one, then you had less of an 80% chance to actually finish the game. No matter what glitch you were looking for, Gothic 3 was more than capable of delivering it to you. Needless to say, the Gothic community was furious, but not only at Piranha Bytes and Joe Wood, who lied to them, but also the national media outlets. Many fans accused the media of being bribed, with some giving the game ratings from 80 to 90% while barely, if at all, mentioning the unplayable state of the game. While the size of the seamless world has never been seen before like this in a video game, the veterans complained that Gothic 3 is only similar to the previous Gothic games on paper, and that Piranha Bytes changed too much about the formula. Despite all this, Joe Wood issued a thank you letter towards the community for more than 150,000 units sold in less than 7 days. The biggest success of the Gothic franchise to date. Mike Hoge apologized for Gothic 3's quality, calling the game unfinished, and that they underestimated the amount of problems that the people would encounter. Piranha Bytes began to re-engage with the disappointed community, but at the same time, relationships with the publisher Joe Wood worsened, and Koch Media began to sell their shares of the company. On November 20th, PC Powerplay released an article called The Joe Wood File, which summarizes Joe Wood's threat calling in detail and making clear that several other outlets were affected by this as well. Piranha Bytes spent the following months developing a total of 5 patches and talking to the community about a potential Gothic 3 add-on similar to Night of the Raven, at least until May 22nd, 2007. Joe Wood and Piranha Bytes struggled in their negotiations for both the Gothic 3 add-on and Gothic 4, with the first being due to budget disagreements and the second due to legal issues. This led the developer studio to abandon their publisher and with it, splitting the Gothic franchise. Piranha Bytes kept the rights for Gothic 1, and Joe Wood kept the rights for Gothic 2 and Gothic 3, as well as future games of the series for a limited time period. Stefan Berger, head of production management at Joe Wood, stated in an interview on the same day that not only were they investigating if Piranha Bytes can be forced to complete the patches for Gothic 3, but also that the development studio didn't matter for a game like Gothic, as Gothic is Gothic, and Gothic is successful. They were also hinting at a console port of Gothic 3. The future of Gothic and Gothic 3 was a giant question mark at this point. Joe Wood kept promising that future patches would in fact come, but fans had a hard time believing them and were fed up with the corporate lies. However, sales of Gothic 3 kept increasing, selling over 500,000 copies by March of 2007. With Piranha Bytes making a deal with Koch Media to publish their new Risen series, Joe Wood was left trying to find new developers for the Gothic franchise. In the meantime, the Gothic community was left with no information, and to their knowledge, neither Joe Wood or Piranha Bytes would ever deliver another patch to fix Gothic 3. Dear viewers, let me introduce you to the user Hans Trapp, the one who began to develop his own patches for the game and kicked off something larger than he could have ever imagined. 1 month after the split of Gothic, Hans Trapp, a user known for his quirk of making patches for himself to fix issues about games he doesn't like, and this user made his first patch public, which would fix a mandatory main quest that was otherwise incompletable, leading to an, even oh so slightly, more enjoyable experience. The community was inspired by this work, catching the interest of another user named Glockenbeat, who began to organize a development team to patch Gothic 3, with Hans Trapp being one of the first members in what will be known as the Community Patch Team. After releasing the 4th patch within 2 months, Wood began to support the fan developers with all the tools that Piranha Bytes had at their disposal for Gothic 3. Unfortunately, the patchwork required more than that, however, so the community patch team had to develop their own tools like the tiny Hexa script to accelerate development. In July of 2007, Wood announced the next title in the Gothic franchise, Gothic 3: The Beginning. Developed by Handy Games, the game launched in January 2008 with overwhelmingly positive reviews due to its classic RPG design, but it flopped commercially despite being hailed as one of the best, if not the best, mobile title of 2008. The majority of the community ignored the mobile game. Koch Media has sold all of their Wood stocks by March of 2008, and Piranha Bytes began to tease their new game, Risen, which they announced on August 6th. In the meantime, Gothic received another announcement on April 14th, which, to the community's surprise, was a standalone add-on named Gothic 3: Forsaken Gods. Suspicions about the game quickly rose, however, as Wood refused to share the name of the developer studio and kept reassuring the community that, this time, the developer would listen to the feedback. Released on November 21st in the same year, developed by an Indian developer studio named Trine Games, the game was yet another disaster. But how could that possibly be? The game featured every error, bug or glitch from the original Gothic 3, despite official patches already fixing most of these issues. In addition to that, the add-on featured even more bugs and glitches compared to the original Gothic 3. The voice acting and localization was incomplete, to a point where vital story characters didn't even have names. The changes to the gameplay and balancing broke Gothic 3's mechanics even more than before, and while we're at it, to top it all off, 2/3 of Gothic 3's entire world was removed. Forsaken Gods received 4 patches in 3 months before Wood abandoned the game. And at this point I should really mention that Forsaken Gods was still far beyond a playable state. The community patch team struggled with their own set of issues during that time, having a fluctuating number of members ranging from 10 to 14, a completely new editor to work with, as well as receiving a mostly undocumented source code, which slowed down work more than it should have. The newfound developer for Gothic 4, Spellbound, also helped as soon as they could and managed to deactivate the unstable dual-core processing, which was responsible for a lot of crashing issues. The problems of Gothic 3 didn't end there though, as fixing issues on, let's say, the AI broke something else entirely, which turned this project into a very long trial and error development phase. This development would end up taking 3 years, with the last unofficial community patch being released on May 31st of 2010. Wood teased the next main entry in the Gothic franchise by revealing the developer of Gothic 4 on August 31st of 2007. The main announcement for the game arrived on September 8th of 2008 in a private showcase for the media. Previously rumored to be called Gothic 4 Genesis, now received its official name, Arcania, a Gothic tale, with Spellbound promising a heavy focus on the story. This would eventually become a meme within the Gothic community for all the scrapped features. The successor to Crazy Even, the new community manager Megalomaniac, also provided a good amount of memes for the Gothic community. For example, Megalomaniac made secondary accounts on the Risen forum and tried to trash talk the game. Skipping forward, Piranha Bytes released their spiritual sequel to Gothic, Risen, on October 2nd, 2009. In January 2010, Wood suddenly announced that instead of the name being called Arcania, a Gothic tale, it will instead release as Arcania Gothic 4. When reviews went online on the release day, October 12th of 2010, receptions were surprisingly negative, mixed at best. Arcania completely ditched any characteristics of the series, trying to aim for the popular hack and slay market instead. A cliché and uneventful story that failed to garner interest combined with monotonous button mashing didn't make for a good game in many people's opinion, and that's what the media also thought. Most often praised was the dynamic combat system, the graphics, and its technically more stable release in comparison to previous Gothic titles. The game sold roughly 28,000 units on the first day, which Joe would describe as a commercial success. Arcania's release, however, also sent one clear sign to the fans. Gothic is dead. Only 2 months later, on December 9th, Joe would announce the next installment of the Gothic franchise, Arcania, Gothic 4, Fall of the Tarif. A standalone add-on that would directly continue the story of the main game, and it was also going to be developed by Spellbound. As you can imagine, the story will have a rather short ending from here. On January 7th, 2011, Joe Wood filed for insolvency. Failing to convince their shareholders for more investments, Joe Wood had to shut its doors on April 21st, 2011. The licenses and labels were acquired by Nordic Games in August of 2011, including the Gothic license. At this point, no one believed that this add-on would ever see the light of day. But Nordic Games surprisingly announced that Arcania Fall of the Tarif would release on October 25th of 2011. Unfortunately, nobody in the community or in the media really cared for it anymore. They were proven right when Fall of the Tarif released as a barely finished game that was even more underwhelming than Arcania itself was. In 2012, Piranha Bytes received the license to all Gothic games back and immediately erased The Beginning, Forsaken Gods, Arcania, and Fall of the Tarif from the Gothic canon. Since then, the Gothic games have received ports on GOG and Steam. In 2013, Arcania, The Complete Tale, was released on PlayStation 3, which was later ported to PlayStation 4 in 2015. Nordic Games also removed the subtext Gothic 4 from Arcania, in order for it not to be associated with the original IP. From an innovative vision of a seamless world that would be exploding with details, to a mindless hack and slay that betrays the very idea of the Gothic formula. If you are wondering about the state of the community patch team managed to fix most of Forsaken Gods and released the enhanced version of Forsaken Gods on March 22nd of 2011, which they improved one more time with another 1GB patch on December 29th, 2011. Nordic Games contacted the community patch team. By now they renamed themselves into Mad Vulture Games to make one last patch for Gothic 3. This final, official patch was released in collaboration with Nordic Games on April 25th, 2012. Nordic Games rebranded themselves to THQ Nordic in the wake of THQ's bankruptcy. Piranha Bytes went on to make the Risen trilogy and most recently released Elex. Kai Rosenkrantz composed the soundtrack for the first Risen game, but then left the company to focus on his own work. He returned as a composer to the gaming industry with 2017's The Long Journey Home. Mad Vulture Games went on to create a few games like Raging Titan, but they haven't shown a sign of life since 2016. Both Trying Games and Spellbound died alongside the Gothic series. But the remaining employees of Spellbound founded Black Forest Games, and it's still active to this day. They were acquired by THQ Nordic in 2017. On May 22nd, 2019, Piranha Bytes was completely acquired by THQ Nordic, giving them the rights to all Gothic games as well as the license to all future Gothic titles. Thank you very much for watching. This would usually be the part where someone tells you to like and subscribe or comment if you suffocate or something, but I'm just glad this video is done. I hope you had an enjoyable time watching, and I wish you a good one? Yeah, a good one is enough for now. I wish you, dear viewer, a good day.